The Montana blizzard hit Devil's Ridge like a freight train, burying everything under 3 feet of snow in less than 6 hours. Marcus Steele Rodriguez gunned his Harley through the whiteout, leather jacket doing nothing against the bone-chilling cold, when he spotted the broken-down minivan on the shoulder. Inside, Sarah Chen clutched her 5 children, ages 3 to 14, as the temperature plummeted below zero. No heat, no gas, no hope. What Sarah didn't know was that Steele had spent 12 years running guns for the Serpents Brotherhood, one of the most feared motorcycle clubs in the Northwest. What he didn't know was that Sarah's late husband had stolen $2 million from Steele's own club before his death, and the Brotherhood was closing in fast. Steele had 2 choices: walk away and let nature take its course, or risk everything to save a family that could destroy him. The decision he made in that frozen moment would ignite a war that would test every loyalty he'd ever known. But here's what nobody saw coming. What happened when Sarah discovered who Steele really was? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Steele cut his engine and squinted through the swirling snow. The minivan sat at an odd angle, its hazard lights blinking weakly against the storm. Most people would have kept riding. Devil's Ridge Highway was notorious for claiming lives, and stopping for strangers was a luxury few could afford in weather like this. But Steele wasn't most people. The serpent tattoo coiled around his neck might mark him as a killer, but somewhere beneath the scar tissue and hardened exterior, a sliver of humanity still flickered. He trudged through knee-deep snow toward the vehicle, his steel-toed boots crunching with each step. The wind howled like a wounded animal, threatening to knock him sideways. When he reached the driver's side window, he had to wipe away the frost to peer inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman with Asian features and desperate eyes held a toddler against her chest. 4 other children huddled around her, 2 boys who looked like twins, maybe 8 years old, a girl around 10, and a teenager with defiant eyes despite the terror etched across her face. Their breath created small clouds in the frigid air, and Steele could see they were all shivering violently. The woman noticed him and jerked back, clutching her children tighter. Her lips were turning blue, and frost had begun forming on the inside of the windows. They had maybe an hour before hypothermia claimed them all. Steele tapped gently on the glass and held up his hands, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. Not easy when you're 6'2" with gang tattoos and a face that had seen too many fights. The woman cracked the window an inch. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Don't hurt us." "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt anybody." Steele's voice was gravelly but surprisingly gentle. "Your van break down?" She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Engine died. Phone's dead. We've been here for 2 hours. 2 hours in this weather." Steele's jaw tightened. These kids should already be showing signs of severe hypothermia. "What's your name?" "Sarah Chen." The name hit Steele like a physical blow. Chen. He'd heard that name whispered in the clubhouse, always followed by curses and promises of retribution. But this woman, this mother fighting to keep her children alive, she didn't look like the wife of a man who'd betrayed the Brotherhood. "I'm Marcus," he said, deliberately omitting his road name. "I can help you, but we need to move fast. There's a truck stop about 5 miles up the road." Sarah's eyes darted to his leather jacket, taking in the patches and symbols that marked him as Serpent's Brotherhood. Fear flashed across her face, but desperation won out. "Okay," she whispered. Steele jogged back to his bike and fired it up. The Harley protested in the cold but roared to life. He pulled alongside the van and gestured for Sarah to follow him. The minivan's engine turned over weakly, caught, then died. He tried again. Nothing. Steele shut off his bike and walked back to the van. "Engine's done. We're going to have to double up on the bike." Sarah's eyes went wide. "All of us? On that?" "It's either that, or you freeze to death out here." Steele was already calculating weight distribution and wind resistance. It would be dangerous, maybe impossible, but it was their only shot. The oldest girl, the teenager, spoke up for the first time. "Mom, we can't trust him. Look at his jacket. Smart kid." If only she knew how right she was. Steele met Sarah's eyes through the window. "Ma'am, I know how this looks, but your children are going to die if we don't move now." Sarah looked at each of her children, seeing the blue tinge creeping into their lips, the way the youngest had stopped shivering. Never a good sign. "Okay," she said finally, "we'll come with you." As Steele helped load the family onto his bike, he had no idea that he was making the decision that would change everything. The Hells Angels clubhouse squatted like a concrete fortress on the outskirts of Bakersfield, its windows barred and walls scarred by decades of violence and brotherhood. Steele's Harley rumbled to a stop outside, the engine's growl echoing off the building's facade before falling silent. He sat motionless for a moment, his hands still gripping the handlebars, trying to process what the hell he'd just done. 43 years old, and he'd never brought a stranger to the clubhouse, never broken protocol. The club had rules about outsiders, especially when it came to women and children. But something about that desperate mother and her kids had cut through every barrier he'd built around himself. The heavy steel door opened before he could knock. Razor stepped out, his scarred face twisted into its perpetual scowl. The man's real name was Danny Kowalski, but nobody had called him that in 15 years. Not since he'd earned his road name by carving up 3 rival bikers with a straight razor during a bar fight in Fresno. "Boss wants to see you," Razor grunted, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Now." Steele followed him through the dimly lit corridor lined with photographs of dead brothers and newspaper clippings from their more notorious exploits. The smell of motor oil, cigarettes, and stale beer permeated everything. This place had been his home for over 2 decades, but tonight it felt different, hostile. The main room buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Brothers lounged on worn leather couches, playing poker, drinking, and conducting the kind of business that kept them all in custom motorcycles and expensive lawyers. Conversations died as Steele walked through, replaced by curious stares and whispered speculation. President Jake Diesel Morrison sat in his usual spot at the far end of the bar, a mountain of a man whose grey beard couldn't hide the cruel set of his mouth. At 62, he'd led the Bakersfield chapter for nearly 3 decades through wars, federal raids, and countless betrayals. His cold blue eyes tracked Steele's approach like a predator sizing up potential prey. "Heard you picked up some strays tonight," Diesel said without preamble, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. "That true?" Steele nodded, refusing to show the unease crawling up his spine. Woman and her kids were freezing to death in a broken-down car. Couldn't just leave them there. "Couldn't you?" Diesel took a slow sip of his whiskey, letting the question hang in the air. "Since when do we run a charity service for desperate housewives?" Several brothers chuckled, but the sound held no warmth. Steele recognized the dynamic at play. Diesel was testing him, probing for weakness. Any sign of softness could be used against him later, especially with tensions already running high over the territory dispute with the Mongols. "Since it was the right thing to do," Steele replied evenly. "Last I checked, we weren't in the business of letting kids freeze to death." Diesel's expression darkened. "The right thing? Brother, the right thing is keeping this club's business private. The right thing is not bringing strangers into our world where they might see or hear things they shouldn't. The right thing is remembering that your loyalty belongs to this patch first, last, and always." The president stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the bar. Other brothers began drifting closer, sensing potential conflict. Steele felt the familiar weight of the moment, understanding that his next words could determine everything. "My loyalty has never been in question," Steele said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. 22 years wearing this patch, 22 years bleeding for this club. I'm not about to throw that away over helping some desperate family. Then you won't mind if I send a couple of the boys to check on your new house guests?" Diesel replied with a sharp smile. "Make sure they understand the importance of keeping their mouths shut about where they spent the night." Steele's blood ran cold. He knew what that meant. Brothers like Razor and Tommy Snake Martinez didn't make social calls. Their version of ensuring silence usually involved fear, intimidation, and sometimes worse. The image of those 5 terrified children flashed through his mind, followed by their mother's grateful smile. "That won't be necessary," Steele said carefully. "They don't know anything about club business." Woman was half dead from cold and exhaustion. Kids were barely conscious. They're not a threat. "Everyone's a threat until proven otherwise," Diesel countered. "You know that better than most. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take Razor and Snake back to your place tomorrow morning. You're going to make sure these people understand that their continued good health depends on their selective memory. Then you're going to send them on their way and forget this moment of weakness ever happened." The ultimatum hung between them like a loaded gun. Steele felt the weight of every brother's stare, understanding that his response would echo through the club for months to come. Outside, wind rattled the building's windows, reminding him of the storm still raging across the valley. The morning came too soon, pale winter light filtering through the frost-covered windows of Steele's cabin. He'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing from the living room where the family slept. The woman, Sarah, she'd finally told him her name was Sarah, had barely spoken after getting the children settled, but her eyes had held a gratitude so fierce it made his chest tight. Now, standing in his kitchen making coffee with hands that had taken lives, he wondered what the hell he was supposed to do next. The smart thing would be to get them warm, fed, and on their way to whatever family they had left. The smart thing would be to forget this ever happened. But Sarah's youngest, a girl who couldn't be more than 4, had crawled into his lap the night before and fallen asleep like she belonged there. When was the last time anyone had trusted him like that? His phone buzzed against the wooden counter. Diesel's name flashed on the screen. "Yeah? Church meeting tonight. Mandatory." Diesel's voice carried an edge that made Steele's jaw clench. "Hear you had some excitement yesterday. Nothing I couldn't handle. That's what worries me, brother. Word is you went off script. Left the scene clean?" Steele's eyes drifted toward the living room, where he could hear the children stirring. "Clean as I could make it." "Good. Be there at 8. We got business to discuss." The line went dead. Steele set the phone down harder than necessary, the sharp crack making Sarah appear in the doorway. She'd braided her dark hair back, and in the morning light he could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 30, with the kind of worn beauty that spoke of too much hardship too soon. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But if you need us gone—" "You're not going anywhere. Not yet." The words came out rougher than he intended. "Roads are still bad, and the kids need more time to recover." She studied his face with those 2 knowing eyes. "What kind of trouble are you in because of us?" Before he could answer, her oldest boy, Tommy, maybe 12, shuffled into the kitchen. The kid had been watching Steele like a hawk since they'd arrived, protective in that way boys get when they think they're the man of the house too early. "Mom, Emma's asking for breakfast," Tommy said, but his attention was fixed on Steele, "and she wants to know if the scary man has any cereal." "I'm not scary," Steele found himself saying, then immediately felt ridiculous. He was 6'3" of leather and scars with "Born to Raise Hell" tattooed across his knuckles. Of course he was scary. Tommy shrugged with the brutal honesty of youth. "Emma thinks your bike is cool, though. She wants to see it." "Tommy," Sarah warned, but Steele was already moving toward the door. "Come on, kid. I'll show you the garage." The Harley sat in the dim space like a sleeping predator, all black chrome and barely contained power. Emma pressed her small face against Steele's leg as she stared at it with wide eyes, while the other children hung back in a cluster of curiosity and caution. "It's so big," Emma whispered. "Loud, too," Steele said, surprising himself by crouching down to her level. "Want to sit on it?" Her squeal of delight brought something uncomfortably close to a smile to his face. As he lifted her onto the seat, showing her how to hold the handlebars, He caught Sarah watching from the doorway. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something soft in it that made his chest do that strange, tight thing again. "You're good with them," she said quietly, when the children had scattered to explore the rest of the garage. "Don't sound so surprised. It's just—" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Their father he wasn't patient like that. "Where is he?" "Afghanistan. 3 years ago." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Steele heard the grief underneath. "He left us the house, some debt, and not much else. When the bank came, I thought maybe my sister in Oregon." She trailed off, and Steele didn't push. He'd learned enough about loss to recognize when someone was carrying too much of it. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Diesel. "Bring your cut, full colors." The cut was more than leather and patches. It was everything he'd been for the last 15 years, brotherhood, purpose, the only family he'd ever known. But looking at Emma still gripping his handlebars like she owned the world, at Sarah trying to rebuild something from nothing, at Tommy standing guard over siblings who looked at Steele like he might actually be one of the good guys. For the first time in his life, Marcus Rodriguez wondered if there might be something worth more than the club that had saved him from the streets. The realization scared him more than any rival gang ever had. The morning came with the sound of children's laughter echoing through Marcus's warehouse, a sound so foreign to these walls that it might as well have been birdsong in hell. He stood at the kitchen window, nursing black coffee and watching Emma help her kids build a snowman in the small yard behind his place. The widow had color in her cheeks today, and the children moved with the boundless energy that came from a full belly and a warm night's sleep. His phone buzzed against the metal counter. Viper's name flashed across the screen. "Church tonight," the gravelly voice said without preamble. "8 sharp. Don't be late." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. Church meetings weren't requests in the Hells Angels. They were commands written in blood and consequence. He'd known this moment would come. Word traveled fast in their world, and his absence from the clubhouse hadn't gone unnoticed. "Uncle Marcus!" Little Sophia burst through the back door, her cheeks red with cold and excitement. "Come see our snowman. He looks just like you." All grumpy and scary. Despite everything, Marcus found himself almost smiling. "Grumpy and scary, huh? But nice on the inside," she added quickly, wrapping her small arms around his leather-clad leg. "Mama says you're our guardian angel." Guardian angel. If only she knew the things those hands had done, the blood that stained them. Angels didn't break kneecaps for late payments or run guns across state lines. Angels didn't belong to organizations that settled disputes with violence and demanded loyalty unto death. Emma appeared in the doorway, snow dusting her dark hair. "Sophia, come help with lunch. Mr. Rodriguez has been kind enough already." "Marcus," he corrected automatically. "And she's fine." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Emma had questions. He could see them lurking behind her careful politeness. Questions about why a man like him lived alone in a warehouse, why he had enough children's clothes to outfit her entire family, why his phone rang at all hours with calls he took in hushed tones. "The roads are clearing up," she said carefully. "We should probably start thinking about finding somewhere more permanent to stay. Where exactly did you plan on going?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Emma's composure cracked just enough to reveal the fear beneath. We'll figure something out. There are shelters, maybe family services." "With 5 kids? In this weather?" Marcus set down his coffee harder than necessary. "You'd be split up before nightfall. Kids scattered across different homes, different families. That won't happen." "You sure about that?" His voice carried the weight of experience, of seeing how the system chewed up families like hers and spit out the pieces. Social workers see a homeless widow with 5 mouths to feed. They don't see a family worth keeping together. They see a problem to be managed. Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "So, what are you suggesting? That we stay here indefinitely? Impose on your kindness until you get tired of playing house with strangers?" The accusation hit harder than she'd intended. He could tell by the way her face immediately softened. But the words were already out there, hanging between them like a blade. "I'm not playing anything," Marcus said quietly. "But those kids are safe here, fed, warm, together. That counts for something, in my book." Before Emma could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was Tank, and Marcus knew better than to ignore 2 calls in one morning. "We got problems, brother." Tank's voice carried a tension that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Someone's been asking questions about you, about where you've been the last couple days." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that end with people disappearing. Meet me at Sal's in 20. And Steele? Come alone." Marcus pocketed the phone to find Emma watching him with growing alarm. She'd heard enough of the conversation to understand that whatever life he'd built here, whatever sanctuary he'd offered them, was about to collapse. "You're in trouble," she said. It wasn't a question. "I can handle it. Because of us? Because you helped us?" Marcus grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, the familiar weight of his gun settling against his ribs. "Because I made a choice. And in my world, choices have consequences." He paused at the door, looking back at this woman who'd stumbled into his life carrying 5 children and more courage than any person should need. "Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone but me." "Marcus, I'll be back," he said, though they both heard the uncertainty in his voice. "I promise." The promise tasted like ash in his mouth as he stepped into the cold, knowing that in his world, promises were just another luxury most people couldn't afford. Steele's Harley rumbled to a stop outside the emergency room entrance, the engine's growl echoing off the hospital's concrete walls. Sarah clutched Tommy against her chest while the other children huddled close, their faces pale but no longer blue with cold. The ride had been harrowing. 5 people crammed onto a motorcycle built for 2, Sarah behind him with Tommy, while Emma, Jake and Lily somehow managed to balance on the extended seat he'd jerry-rigged years ago for cargo runs. "Get them inside," Steele commanded, dismounting and helping Sarah down. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet hit the pavement. "Now." The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing a wave of heated air that felt like salvation. Steele herded the family toward the reception desk, his leather vest and intimidating presence causing several people in the waiting room to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "This kid needs a doctor," he announced to the startled receptionist, a young woman whose eyes went wide at the sight of him. "Hypothermia. All of them are half frozen." Within minutes, medical staff swarmed around them. Tommy was whisked away on a gurney while Sarah tried to follow, stumbling with exhaustion. A nurse caught her arm, guiding her to a wheelchair despite her protests that she was fine. Steele stood back, watching the organized chaos of emergency medicine unfold. He should leave. His good deed was done, and hospitals made him uncomfortable. Too many memories of patchovers gone wrong, of brothers who didn't make it home. But something kept his boots planted on the sterile linoleum floor. "Sir?" A doctor in scrubs approached him. "Are you with the family?" "Yeah," Steele heard himself say, surprising them both. "The little boy is stable. We're warming him slowly, monitoring his core temperature. The other children are showing signs of mild hypothermia, but they'll recover with rest and warmth. The mother," the doctor paused, consulting his chart. "When did she last eat?" Steele realized he had no idea. "Been a while, I'm guessing. We're going to keep them overnight for observation. Do they have insurance? Next of kin we should contact?" The questions hung in the air like smoke. Steele knew the answers before Sarah could be asked. No insurance, no family, nowhere to go. The system would chew them up and spit them out, probably separate the kids into different foster homes. He'd seen it happen before. "They're with me," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "I'll handle it." 2 hours later, Sarah found him in the family waiting area, slumped in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame. She'd showered and changed into hospital scrubs, her dark hair still damp but clean. The haunted look in her eyes had softened slightly. "They said Tommy's going to be fine," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "Thanks to you," Steele grunted. uncomfortable with gratitude. "Kid's tougher than he looks." "They all are." Sarah's voice carried the weight of months spent keeping her children alive through sheer willpower. "The nurse said you told them we were with you, that you'd cover the bills." "Yeah, well." Steele shifted in his seat. Seemed like the thing to say. "Why?" The question was soft but insistent. "You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Steele studied her face, the sharp cheekbones made more prominent by hunger, the premature lines around her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw that said she'd fight the world before she'd let it break her. She reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. "My old man used to beat the hell out of me and my mom," he said finally. "Social services came around a few times, but nobody ever did anything that stuck. Maybe if someone had—" He trailed off, surprised he'd shared even that much. Sarah nodded slowly. "My husband died 8 months ago. Heart attack at 32, no warning. Insurance company found a way to deny the claim. Said he'd lied about a pre-existing condition he didn't even know he had. Lost the house 3 months later. Where you been staying?" "Shelters when we could get in. My car when we couldn't. It broke down yesterday." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was trying to get us to my sister's place in Phoenix, but we ran out of money in Bakersfield." Steele's phone buzzed. "A text from Diesel Church tonight." "Mandatory." He stared at the screen, reality crashing back. The club didn't know where he was or what he was doing. They expected him at the meeting, expected his loyalty and his silence. Getting involved with civilians, especially ones that might bring heat from social services, was not something Tank would appreciate. Another text arrived, this one from Reaper. "Heard you missed the drop. Tank's asking questions." Steele deleted both messages and powered off the phone. Tomorrow's problems could wait. Tonight, a family was alive because he'd made a choice. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered yard as Marcus stepped onto the porch, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Inside, he could hear Sarah moving around the kitchen, the gentle clatter of dishes mixing with the children's voices. 3 days had passed since he'd brought them here, and somehow the cabin felt different, warmer, more alive than it had in years. His phone buzzed against his chest. Tank's name flashed on the screen. "Yeah, church tonight, 8 sharp. Don't be late, brother." Tank's voice carried an edge that made Marcus's jaw tighten. "I'll be there." "Good. We need to talk about your situation." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, knowing this conversation had been inevitable. The club didn't like mysteries, and he'd been scarce for 3 days without explanation. In the Hells Angels, that kind of behavior raised questions, dangerous ones. Behind him, the door creaked open. Sarah emerged, wrapping a thin sweater around her shoulders. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing the delicate curve of her neck and the worry lines that seemed permanently etched around her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his expression. Marcus pocketed the phone. "Just club business." She nodded, but he caught the flicker of fear that crossed her features. They hadn't talked much about what he did, but she wasn't stupid. The leather vest, the bike, the tattoos. She knew what world he belonged to. "Marcus, I've been thinking." She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder barely reaching his chest. "We can't stay here forever. The kids and we need to figure out what comes next." He turned to look at her, struck again by her quiet strength. Most people would have crumbled under the weight she carried, but Sarah just kept moving forward, one step at a time. "Where would you go?" he asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe the shelter in town, just until I can find work, get back on my feet." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the uncertainty underneath. "The shelter's not safe." The words came out harsher than he intended. "Place is a revolving door for junkies and drifters. It's not your problem to solve." But it was. Somehow, in 3 short days, this woman and her children had become his problem, and more than that, they'd become something he actually cared about protecting. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd felt in years. "Stay," he said simply. At least until spring. Sarah shook her head. We can't impose like that. You've done enough. It's not charity. The place is too big for one person anyway. He gestured toward the sprawling cabin. Kids seem happy here. Through the window, they could see Emma helping her younger siblings with breakfast while baby Dylan sat contentedly in his makeshift high chair. The scene looked natural, like they belonged. The world I live in, Marcus said slowly, it's not exactly family-friendly. I know. Do you? He turned to face her fully. Because if you stay, if people start asking questions, it could get complicated fast. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Are we in danger? The honest answer was maybe, probably. The club had rules about civilians, about keeping the two worlds separate, bringing a family into his space, into his life. It violated protocols that had kept the Brotherhood intact for decades. Not from me, he said finally. It wasn't the reassurance she'd asked for, and they both knew it. Mom, Emma's voice called from inside. Tommy spilled the juice. Sarah sighed, the maternal instinct pulling her back toward chaos management. But she paused at the door. Why are you doing this? She asked. Really? Marcus looked out at the forest beyond his property, at the endless expanse of white that had nearly claimed this family. He thought about Tank's call, about the questions that would come tonight, about the choice he was making, without fully understanding it himself. Maybe because for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving something, he said. Maybe I'm actually saving it. Sarah's expression softened. For a moment, the distance between them felt smaller, the possibility of something more than circumstance hanging in the cold air. Tommy made a volcano with the juice, Emma announced, appearing in the doorway with syrup in her hair and exasperation in her voice. The moment broke, but gently. Sarah smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen from her, and disappeared inside to deal with the crisis. Marcus remained on the porch, watching the sun climb higher and knowing that tonight everything might change. The club would demand answers he wasn't sure he could give, but for now, this moment, he had something worth protecting, even if it destroyed him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen as Sarah watched Marcus work on the broken heater in the living room. 3 days had passed since the confrontation with Tommy, and the tension in the house had become almost unbearable. Marcus moved with mechanical precision, but she could see the weight of something heavy pressing down on his shoulders. "Mama, why does Mr. Marcus look so sad?" Emma whispered, tugging on Sarah's sleeve. Before Sarah could answer, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air outside. Marcus's head snapped up from his work, his entire body going rigid. Through the frost-covered window, Sarah counted at least 6 bikes pulling into their driveway. "Take the kids upstairs," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Lock the bedroom door and don't come out until I say, 'Marcus, what's—' Now, Sarah." His eyes met hers, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear. Not for himself, but for them. She gathered the children quickly, ignoring their protests as she herded them up the narrow staircase. From the upstairs window, she could see men dismounting their bikes, their leather cuts marking them as Hell's Angels. One man stood apart from the rest, older, with silver threading through his black hair and scars mapping his weathered face. The front door opened without a knock. "Steele," the older man's voice carried through the house like a death sentence. "Been looking for you, brother. Demon." Marcus's response was equally cold. Didn't expect a house call. Sarah pressed her ear to the bedroom door, her heart hammering as she tried to make sense of the conversation below. The children huddled on the bed, sensing the danger even if they couldn't understand it. "You missed church on Sunday," Demon continued. "That's not like you. Then we hear stories about you playing house with some dead man's family. My personal time is my own." A harsh laugh echoed through the house. "Not when it interferes with club business. Tommy came to see me, Steele. Had some interesting things to say about your new priorities." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Tommy, the man who'd threatened them, had gone to Marcus's motorcycle club. She could hear the shuffle of boots, the creak of leather, and underneath it all, the barely contained violence that seemed to pulse through the house like a living thing. "Tommy's got a big mouth and a small brain," Marcus replied. "Always has." "Maybe so, but he's also club family. And club family doesn't get disrespected by outsiders. Word is, you put your hands on him over some woman and her brats." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah found herself holding her breath, waiting for Marcus's response. "I protected innocent people from a predator," Marcus finally said. "If that's a problem for the club, maybe we need to talk about what we really stand for." "We stand for brotherhood." Demon's voice exploded through the house. "We stand for loyalty to the patch, not for playing hero to every sob story that crosses our path. You took an oath, Steele. Blood in, blood out, remember?" Heavy footsteps moved through the living room. Sarah could imagine the other men spreading out, positioning themselves. Her mind raced, thinking about the back stairs, about whether she could get the children out through the kitchen door. "I remember," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the obvious threat. "I also remember when this club meant something more than shaking down widows and orphans. Times change. We do what we have to do to survive. And right now, what we need is for you to walk away from this situation. Come back to the fold, Steele. Don't make this harder than it has to be. And if I don't—" Another silence, this one heavy with implications. When Demon spoke again, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, but Sarah caught every word. "Then you're no longer under club protection, and neither are they." Emma started to cry softly behind her, and Sarah quickly moved to comfort her daughter, pressing a finger to her lips. Downstairs she could hear Marcus moving, and she wondered if he was reaching for a weapon. "You'd threaten innocent children?" Marcus asked, and Sarah could hear the dangerous edge creeping into his voice. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just stating facts. You walk away from your obligations. You walk away from everything that comes with the patch, including our protection." The weight of the ultimatum settled over the house like a suffocating blanket. Sarah understood now what Marcus had been carrying these past few days. He'd been trying to figure out how to protect them, while honoring commitments she was only beginning to understand. "I need time to think," Marcus said finally. "You have until midnight tomorrow," Demon replied. "Make the right choice, Steele, for everyone's sake." The sound of boots heading toward the door filled Sarah with relief, but Demon's parting words chilled her to the bone. "Oh, and Steele? Tommy sends his regards." The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. Marcus sat in the corner chair, his leather jacket draped over Emma's sleeping form while she curled against his side. The other kids had finally crashed in various positions around the waiting area, exhaustion winning over adrenaline. Sarah emerged from behind the curtained area where they'd taken Tommy, her face pale but relieved. "Pneumonia," she said quietly, settling into the chair across from Marcus. "But they caught it early. Antibiotics should have him back on his feet in a week." Marcus nodded, feeling a knot in his chest loosen slightly. The kid had scared him more than he cared to admit when he'd started struggling to breathe during the ride to the hospital. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. The motel, bringing us here." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know how to repay you." "Don't," Marcus said gruffly. Kid needed help. End of story. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't the end. Something had shifted during those frantic minutes when Tommy couldn't catch his breath, when Sarah had looked at Marcus with complete trust that he'd know what to do. The walls he'd spent 38 years building felt paper-thin. His phone buzzed, a text from Razor Church meeting tomorrow night. Mandatory. Bring the info on Santos. Marcus deleted the message, but the reminder of his other life sent ice through his veins. He'd missed 2 club meetings this week, and his brothers were starting to ask questions he didn't have answers for. "Mama?" Emma stirred against his side, blinking up at him with sleepy confusion. "Where's Tommy?" "He's going to be fine, baby," Sarah said softly. The doctors are taking good care of him." Emma nodded and burrowed deeper into Marcus's jacket. Something twisted in his chest at how naturally she sought his protection, how completely she trusted him. When was the last time anyone had looked at him like that? Like he was safety instead of danger? A nurse appeared with discharge papers and instructions. Tommy would stay overnight for observation, but he was stable. Sarah could stay with him while Marcus took the other kids back to the motel. "I can handle them," Marcus found himself saying. "Get some sleep. You look like hell." Sarah's laugh was watery, charming as always, but her eyes held gratitude. "Are you sure? Jake can be a handful and Emma has nightmares sometimes." "I've got it." The words came out more certain than he felt. What did he know about handling scared kids? But the alternative was leaving them alone, and that wasn't happening. The drive back to the motel was quiet, except for soft snores from the back seat. Marcus carried Emma up to the room while the boys trudged behind, their earlier energy completely drained. "Can we get McDonald's tomorrow?" Jake asked as Marcus fumbled with the keycard. "We'll see," Marcus replied, surprised by how easily the parental deflection came. Right now, bed. Getting 4 exhausted kids settled should have been chaos, but they were too tired to resist. Emma claimed the bed closest to the bathroom, while the boys sprawled across the other queen bed like puppies. Marcus took the chair by the window, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and the parking lot. Old habits. "Marcus?" Emma's small voice came from the darkness. "Will you still be here when we wake up?" The question hit him like a physical blow. How many times had he wondered the same thing as a kid, bouncing between foster homes and group facilities? How many mornings had he woken up to find the adults had disappeared, leaving him to figure out survival alone? "Yeah, kid, I'll be here." She sighed contentedly, and within minutes her breathing evened out. Marcus sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of peaceful sleep and wondering what the hell he was doing. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Reza. "Santos is asking questions about the shipment. Need to talk." Marcus stared at the message, his two worlds colliding in ways that made his head pound. The Santos cartel didn't ask questions. They made statements with bullets and body parts. If they were sniffing around the club's territory, blood would follow. Blood that might splash onto the family sleeping 10 feet away. He thought about Sarah's trust, Tommy's fevered grip on his hand, Emma's question about him being there in the morning. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Rodriguez had something to lose beyond his own skin, and that terrified him more than any rival gang or cartel ever could. Outside, a motorcycle rumbled past in the night, and Marcus felt the familiar pull of his brotherhood calling. But inside this room, soft breathing and the scent of children's shampoo anchored him to something he'd never known he wanted. Tomorrow, he'd have to choose which world he belonged to. Tonight, he'd stand guard over dreams he was only beginning to understand. The rumble of approaching motorcycles shattered the morning quiet. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she peered through the kitchen window, watching 3 bikes roll up the gravel driveway. She recognized the patches immediately. Hell's Angels, but not Marcus's chapter. "Kids, go to your rooms." "Now," she whispered urgently, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Emma started to protest, but something in Sarah's tone sent all 5 children scrambling upstairs. Sarah heard their footsteps overhead, followed by the soft click of bedroom doors. The bikers killed their engines and dismounted with deliberate slowness. The leader, a mountain of a man with a braided beard and dead eyes, approached the front door while his companions flanked the house. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but heavy boots were already climbing the porch steps. The knock, when it came, was polite, almost gentle. Somehow that made it worse. Sarah opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am." The bearded man touched the brim of his leather cap with mock courtesy. "Name's Butcher. I'm looking for Steele Rodriguez. Heard he might be staying here. I don't know anyone by that name." Butcher's smile revealed gold teeth. "Now that's interesting." Because my sources tell me different. Mind if we come in? Just want to have a friendly conversation. I'm sorry, but this isn't a good time. The smile vanished. Wasn't really a request, lady. A smaller biker appeared around the corner of the house, shaking his head. No bike here, Butcher, but there's fresh tire tracks in the snow. Big bike. Butcher's eyes never left Sarah's face. You know, lying to the angels isn't real smart. Where is he? Before Sarah could answer, she heard it, the distinctive rumble of Marcus's Harley in the distance. Her heart sank as the sound grew louder. The bikers heard it too, their postures shifting to predatory alertness. Well, well, Butcher murmured. Sounds like our boy's coming home. Marcus rounded the bend and immediately assessed the situation. 3 angels he didn't recognize. Sarah trapped behind her door and the unmistakable tension of violence about to unfold. He'd been expecting this moment since the night he'd chosen to stay, but seeing the threat so close to the house, so close to the children, ignited something primal in his chest. He pulled up slowly, engine rumbling, and dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd faced down enemies before. The patches on the visitors' jackets told him everything he needed to know. Riverside Chapter, Reaper's crew. Butcher, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of old conflicts. Long way from your territory. Steal! Butcher stepped away from the door, his hand resting casually near the knife on his belt. You're a hard man to find these days. Wasn't trying to hide. No? Then why haven't you been answering Reaper's calls? Man's been trying to reach you for weeks. Marcus moved closer, positioning himself between the house and the 3 men. Through his peripheral vision, he caught sight of a small face at an upstairs window, Tommy, watching with wide eyes. The sight hardened his resolve. Been busy, Marcus said simply. Butcher laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Busy playing house? That what we're calling it now? The insult hung in the cold air. Marcus felt his muscles coil, but he forced himself to remain still. Violence here, now, would endanger everything that mattered. What does Reaper want? You know what he wants. The Mexicans are moving on our territory. Reaper's calling in markers, gathering the Brotherhood. Time for the angels to remind everyone who runs the valley. Marcus had known this day would come. The drug war that had been simmering for months was about to explode, and every chapter would be expected to contribute soldiers. In the old days, he would have answered without hesitation. The Brotherhood was everything, worth killing and dying for. Now, glancing back at the house where 5 children waited for their world to make sense again, everything had changed. Tell Reaper I'll call him. Butcher's expression darkened. That's not how this works, Steele. You come with us. Now. I said I'll call him. The 2 flanking bikers stepped forward, hands moving toward weapons. The morning air crackled with tension as 4 men sized each other up, calculating odds and consequences. You've gone soft, Butcher spat. Reaper was right about you. Marcus's hand found the grip of his knife. Try me. For a long moment, the only sound was whined through the pine trees. Then Butcher stepped back, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. 24 hours, Steele. Reaper wants an answer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The 3 men mounted their bikes and roared away, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway with the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on him like an avalanche. The knock came at 3 in the morning, sharp and urgent against the front door. Marcus bolted upright from the couch where he'd been dozing, his hand instinctively reaching for the Glock tucked beneath the cushions. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her robe, eyes wide with fear. Stay up there, he whispered, moving silently toward the door. Through the peephole, he saw Reaper's scarred face illuminated by the porch light, but something was wrong. The man's usual cocky smirk was replaced by genuine concern. Marcus opened the door just wide enough for conversation. What's so important it couldn't wait? You need to get out. Now. Reaper's voice was low, urgent. Tank's coming, and he's bringing half the charter with him. Word is you've gone soft, playing house with some dead man's family. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus had known this moment would come, but he'd hoped for more time. How long do I have? 20 minutes. maybe less. They're gearing up now. Reaper glanced over his shoulder nervously. Look, Steele, I don't know what kind of hold this woman has on you, but walking away from the Brotherhood, that's a death sentence. For all of you. Why are you warning me? 'Cause you saved my ass in Riverside and I pay my debts. Reaper's expression hardened. But after tonight, we're even. You make your choice and you live with it. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of impossible decisions. Upstairs he could hear Sarah's footsteps, the whispered voices of children awakening. His chest tightened as the reality crashed over him. He had minutes to choose between the only family he'd ever known and the family he'd discovered he needed. Sarah appeared in the living room, Emma close behind her. Who was that? We have to go. Now. Marcus was already moving, grabbing the emergency bag he'd kept packed since the second week. Old habits from a dangerous life. Wake the kids, only what you can carry. Marcus, what's happening? Sarah's voice cracked with fear, but she was already turning toward the stairs. The club. They're coming. He pulled on his boots, his leather jacket. I knew this day would come, but I thought... He stopped, looking at her face. Sarah, I'm sorry. This is my fault. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and grabbed his face with both hands. No, this is not your fault. You saved us, remember? The sound of motorcycle engines rumbled in the distance, still several blocks away but getting closer. Emma ran upstairs to help with the younger children while Marcus grabbed the keys to Sarah's van. His Harley would be faster, but he couldn't leave them behind. Not now, not ever. Where do we go? Sarah asked, as she herded sleepy children toward the door, each clutching a hastily packed backpack. I know a place. A friend from before the club. Marcus scooped up little Tommy, who was barely awake. But Sarah, once we leave here, there's no going back. They'll never stop hunting us. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the small house that had become their sanctuary. For a moment, Marcus thought she might change her mind, might decide he wasn't worth this upheaval, this danger to her children. Instead, she reached for his free hand. Then we'd better make sure we're hard to find. The engines were closer now, maybe 6 blocks away. Marcus could distinguish individual bikes, count them by their sounds. Too many. Tank had brought serious firepower. They piled into the van, Marcus behind the wheel, Sarah in the passenger seat trying to keep the younger kids calm while Emma helped buckle seatbelts. As he started the engine, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. The skull and crossbones tattoo on his neck seemed to mock him, a permanent reminder of the life he was abandoning. He pulled out of the driveway without headlights, using only the street lamps to navigate. 3 blocks away, he could see the glow of motorcycle headlights turning onto their street. His heart hammered against his ribs as he realized how close they'd cut it. Are we going to be okay? Lily asked from the back seat, her voice small and scared. Marcus looked at Sarah, saw the trust and determination in her eyes, then back at the road ahead. Behind them, the sound of engines grew fainter as he took a series of turns designed to confuse any pursuit. Yes, sweetheart, he said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. We're going to be just fine. But as the city lights faded in the rearview mirror and they headed into the uncertain darkness beyond, Marcus knew he'd just declared war on the most dangerous men he'd ever known. And this time, he wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for something infinitely more precious and terrifyingly fragile. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and cigarettes, shadows dancing across concrete walls as Marcus pushed through the heavy steel door. 23 members of the Iron Wolves MC sat in a loose circle, their leather cuts bearing patches that told stories of violence and loyalty. At the center, President Jake Viper Morrison leaned back in his chair, eyes cold as winter steel. Steel, Viper's voice carried across the space like a blade. Heard you've been playing house. Marcus kept his face neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Word traveled fast in their world, but he'd hoped for more time. Just helping out a family in need. A family. Viper stood slowly, his massive frame casting a longer shadow. That include the dead husband who owed the serpents 50 grand. The room went dead quiet. Marcus felt every eye on him, measuring his reaction. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion. A few looked hungry for blood. "Didn't know about any debt," Marcus said carefully. "Course you didn't." Viper circled him like a predator. Tommy Walsh was deep in gambling debts, borrowed from the Serpents to cover losses at our poker games. When he couldn't pay, they wanted their pound of flesh from the widow. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. "She doesn't know anything about it." "Maybe. Maybe not." Viper stopped directly in front of him. "But here's what I know. The Serpents came looking for her 3 days ago. Found out one of our own was protecting their asset. Those kids aren't assets. They're innocent. Innocent don't pay debts, brother." The word brother dripped with warning. And now the Serpents think we're interfering with their business. They want the woman, or they want war. Murmurs rippled through the circle. War meant casualties, meant heat from law enforcement, meant everything they'd built could crumble. Marcus understood the calculation, even as his soul rebelled against it. "Give me time to work something out," Marcus said. Viper laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Time? They hit one of our clubhouses last night, burned it to the ground. Left a message saying we got 24 hours to deliver the woman or things get ugly." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus thought of Sarah making breakfast that morning, humming softly while Emma helped crack eggs. Of little Jake building block towers and Miguel reading comic books. Of the trust in Sarah's eyes when she'd kissed his cheek goodbye. "There's another way," Marcus said. "I pay the debt myself." 50,000? Viper raised an eyebrow. "You got that kind of cash lying around?" Marcus didn't, but he'd find it somehow. "I'll figure it out." "Even if you could, it's not about money anymore." Viper returned to his chair. "It's about respect, about showing weakness. The Serpents want blood for the disrespect, and blood is what they'll get. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you got a choice to make, Steele. You've been with this club 8 years, bled for us, killed for us. But now you're letting some piece of ass compromise the safety of your brothers." Red crept into Marcus's vision. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" Viper leaned forward. "You gonna choose her over your family? Over the men who die for you?" The warehouse erupted in voices, some supporting Viper, others defending Marcus. Old loyalties crashed against new realities. Marcus had saved half these men's lives at one point or another, but loyalty in their world came with conditions. "Enough!" Viper's roar silenced them all. "Here's how it's gonna be. You got until midnight to bring us the woman. She pays for her husband's debts. We smooth things over with the Serpents, and this all goes away. And if I refuse, then you're no longer a brother. You're just another enemy." The patch on Marcus's back suddenly felt heavier than lead. 8 years of brotherhood, of belonging to something bigger than himself. These men had been his family when he had nothing else, had given him purpose and identity. But Sarah and her children had given him something else, hope for a different kind of life. 24 hours, Viper repeated. "Bring her here, or don't bother coming back at all." Marcus turned toward the door, feeling 23 pairs of eyes burning into his spine. Outside, his Harley waited in the moonlight, chrome gleaming like promises he might not be able to keep. He thought of Sarah waiting at home, probably reading bedtime stories to the younger kids, while Emma and Miguel finished homework. They trusted him completely, believed he would keep them safe. The weight of that trust pressed down on him harder than any burden he'd ever carried. As he fired up the engine, Marcus realized he was riding toward the most important decision of his life. Behind him lay everything he'd been. Ahead waited everything he could become. The question was whether he'd live long enough to find out which path he'd choose. The morning sun cast long shadows across the warehouse floor as Marcus checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The emergency church meeting wasn't scheduled for another hour, but sleep had been impossible. Every creak of the old building made him reach for his gun. Every distant motorcycle engine set his nerves on edge. Sarah emerged from the makeshift bedroom they'd created in the corner office, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own sleepless night. The children were still asleep, exhausted from the terror of the previous evening's escape. "Any word from Tommy?" she asked quietly, settling beside him on the ratty couch he'd been using as a lookout post. Marcus shook his head. "Radio silence since last night. That's not like him." His phone buzzed and he tensed before seeing it was just a text from Father Miguel confirming the meeting location had been moved to the old rectory basement. "Marcus," Sarah's voice carried a weight that made him look at her fully. "I've been thinking about what happens next, about what this costs you." "Don't." "No, listen to me." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with surprising strength. "I know what the club means to you. It's not just some gang. It's your family, your identity, everything you've built your life around." Marcus pulled his hand away, standing abruptly. "You don't understand what you're talking about." "I understand that you're going to lose everything because you saved us." Sarah rose too, stepping closer. "I understand that Razor will never stop hunting you now, and I understand that somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, I've fallen in love with a man who's sacrificing everything for my children." The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus turned away, staring out the grimy window at the industrial landscape beyond. "Sarah, don't make this more complicated than it already is." "More complicated?" Her laugh held no humor. "Marcus, we're hiding in an abandoned warehouse while psychotic bikers hunt us down. My children are sleeping on blankets on a concrete floor because a turf war exploded around us. How much more complicated could it get?" Before he could answer, the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle approaching made them both freeze. Marcus drew his gun, motioning for Sarah to get back to the children. The engine cut out near the building's entrance. 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 more. Tommy's signal. Marcus holstered the weapon and moved to the side entrance, sliding the heavy bolt back carefully. Tommy stepped inside, his face grim beneath his helmet. "We got problems, brother. Big ones. Razor? Worse. Got word from a prospect whose cousin works dispatch. Cops found 3 bodies at that warehouse where Razor was supposed to meet his contacts. Professional hits, execution style." Tommy's voice dropped lower. "Word is it was Los Hermanos. The cartel boys are cleaning house." Marcus felt his blood chill. Los Hermanos Sangrientos, the Bloody Brothers, were the most ruthless cartel operating in the region. If they were involved, this had escalated beyond a simple club dispute. "There's more," Tommy continued, glancing toward where Sarah stood guard over the sleeping children. "Razor's telling everyone you're working with the cartel. Says you sold out club business to set up the hit." "That's insane." "Yeah, well, insane or not, it's what people are hearing. And Bishop," Tommy hesitated. "Bishop's calling for a vote of no confidence. Emergency meeting tonight." The implications crashed over Marcus like a cold wave. A vote of no confidence would strip him of his position, his protection, everything. Worse, if the membership believed Razor's lies about cartel connections, they might decide he was too dangerous to simply expel. Sarah appeared at his elbow. "What is it?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Stop protecting me from the truth." Her voice carried steel now. "If this affects my children, I have a right to know." Tommy looked between them, understanding flickering in his eyes. "The cartel connection changes everything, Marcus. Even if we prove Razor's lying, the other charters won't risk a war with Los Hermanos. They'll cut us loose in a heartbeat." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, feeling the walls closing in from every direction. Razor had played this perfectly. Even if he couldn't eliminate Marcus directly, he'd created a scenario where the club would do it for him. "There might be another way," Sarah said quietly. Both men looked at her. "What if we disappear? All of us, just vanish completely?" "You can't run from the cartel," Tommy said. "And you sure as hell can't run from the club. They'll find you eventually." "Not if we're dead." Sarah met Marcus's shocked stare steadily. "I mean, if everyone thinks we're dead. The warehouse fire last night. What if we were supposed to be inside? What if we didn't escape?" Marcus stared at her, his mind racing through the possibilities. It was dangerous, almost impossible to pull off convincingly, but it might be their only chance at a life together. That's crazy enough, it might work, Tommy said slowly, but it would have to be perfect. One mistake and you're all really dead. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, but beneath it lurked something darker, the metallic scent of violence waiting to happen. Marcus stood in the center of the concrete floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back, watching as Razor paced in front of him like a predator savoring its prey. 23 years, Steele, Razor said, his voice echoing off the empty walls. 23 years you've been my brother, and this is how you repay me? The other angels formed a loose circle around them. Iron Mike, Diesel, Crow, and a handful of prospects Marcus had helped train. Their faces were stone, but he could see the conflict in some of their eyes. This wasn't how brotherhood was supposed to end. I didn't betray anyone, Marcus said, tasting blood from where Razor's fist had connected with his jaw earlier. I saved a family from freezing to death. You chose them over us. Razor's voice cracked like a whip. You gave information to the feds. You compromised our entire operation. The feds already had their information. Sarah had nothing to do with any of this. Razor stopped pacing, his scarred face twisting into something ugly. Sarah. You even say her name like she means something to you, like she's worth more than your own blood brothers. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Maybe she is. The slap came fast, snapping Marcus's head to the side. When he straightened, blood trickled from his split lip, but his eyes never wavered from Razor's face. You know what has to happen now, Razor said quietly. The Brotherhood has rules. You broke them. There are consequences. I know. Marcus's voice was calm, accepting. He'd known this moment would come the instant he'd made his choice. But I want you to know something, brother. For the first time in my life, I actually feel like I did something worth dying for. Rage flashed across Razor's features. He pulled his knife, the blade catching the harsh fluorescent light. You think love makes you noble? It makes you weak. It makes you forget who you really are. No, Marcus said, and despite everything he smiled. It helped me remember who I could be. The warehouse door burst open with a thunderous crash. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined, flanked by 2 FBI agents with weapons drawn. Behind them, more agents poured through the entrance. FBI! Everyone on the ground! Chaos erupted. Several angels reached for their weapons, but the agents were faster, better positioned. Shouts filled the air as bodies hit the concrete, but Marcus only had eyes for Sarah. You shouldn't have come, he called to her, his heart hammering with fear for her safety. Like hell, she called back, tears streaming down her face. You came for us when we needed you. Now it's my turn. Razor still held his knife, his face a mask of fury as agents closed in around him. This isn't over, Steele. You think the feds can protect you forever? You think this little soccer mom can keep you safe from what you really are? Maybe not, Marcus admitted as Agent Morrison cut his zip ties. But she showed me what I could become. That's more than you ever did. As the agents led Razor away in handcuffs, the club president turned back one last time. You're dead to us, Steele. Dead to the Brotherhood. You're nothing now. I'm everything now, Marcus replied quietly, but Razor was already gone. Sarah rushed to his side, her hands gentle as she examined his injuries. Are you hurt? God, Marcus, when I got Agent Morrison's call, how did you know? He asked, cupping her face with his freed hands. Emma, Sarah said, managing a watery smile. She saw them take you from the playground. Smart girl called 911 and then ran home to tell me. The FBI had been monitoring Razor's communications. They knew something was happening. Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. I thought I'd never see you again. Never see the kids. We're a family, Sarah said fiercely, pulling back to look into his eyes. Families don't abandon each other. Not ever. Agent Morrison approached, holstering his weapon. We'll need a full statement, but the immediate threat is contained. Razor's organization is finished. Marcus nodded, but he couldn't look away from Sarah's face. What happens now? Now? Sarah's smile was radiant despite her tears. Now we go home. The kids are worried sick, and Jake has been practicing a song on his guitar that he wants to play for you, something about heroes and second chances. As they walked toward the warehouse exit together, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The brotherhood he'd lost had been built on fear and violence. The family he'd found was built on love and choice, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Rodriguez was truly free. The safe house felt smaller with each passing hour, the walls seeming to close in as Marcus paced between the kitchen and living room. Through the curtained windows, he could see his brothers maintaining their perimeter, their leather cuts dark against the snow that had begun falling again. Inside, Sarah sat at the scarred wooden table with Emma on her lap, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the children, while fear etched deeper lines around her eyes. Marcus's phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. Viper again. He'd been calling since dawn, and each ignored call felt like another nail in Marcus's coffin. The club wouldn't wait much longer for answers, and Marcus knew that silence was being interpreted as defiance. "You have to answer it eventually," Tommy said from his position by the window. His young face showed the strain of the past few days, dark circles under his eyes from too little sleep and too much adrenaline. "I know." Marcus stopped pacing and looked at the phone's display as it buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Viper's number. It was Reaper's. Marcus stepped into the small bedroom at the back of the house and answered. "Yeah, Steele." Reaper's voice was gravelly, tired. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Church is called for tonight. 8 o'clock. You know where." Marcus closed his eyes. Church meant formal club business, votes, and likely his fate being decided. "And if I don't show? Then you'll have made your choice clear to everyone." Reaper's tone carried no malice, just resignation. "Look, brother, I've been trying to hold the line for you, but the heat's getting too much. Viper's got half the chapter convinced you've lost your mind, and the other half is starting to wonder if he's right." Through the thin walls, Marcus could hear Emma giggling at something one of her brothers had said. Such a simple sound, but it cut through him like a blade. When had their laughter become so important to him? What's the vote about? Your patch? Your future with the club? Maybe your future, period. Reaper's words hung heavy in the air. Viper's pushing hard, Steele. Says you're a liability now that you've gone soft. He's got support. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. 23 years he'd worn the Hells Angels colors. 23 years of brotherhood, of loyalty that ran deeper than blood. But as he listened to Danny teaching Jake how to play cards in the next room, he realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. How much support? Enough to make it close. But Steele... Reaper paused. "There's something else. Word came down from Oakland this morning. Nationals heard about the situation. They want it resolved. Clean." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. National involvement meant this had moved beyond local club politics. It meant the organization itself saw him as a threat that needed neutralizing. "How long do I have?" "Church is at 8. You don't show, or you show and lose the vote." Reaper didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus ended the call and stood in the small bedroom, surrounded by the family's meager possessions. Sarah's few remaining photographs sat on the dresser, images of happier times with her late husband. The children's clothes hung neatly on hooks, everything clean despite their circumstances. This was what a real family looked like, he realized. Not the brotherhood of violence he'd known, but something quieter, more precious. When he returned to the main room, Sarah looked up at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Bad news?" "Yeah." He didn't see the point in lying. "I need to make some arrangements." Sarah stood, settling Emma on her hip. "What kind of arrangements?" Marcus looked around the room at the children, at Tommy and Diesel, who'd risked everything to stand with him, at Sarah, who'd somehow become the center of gravity in his chaotic world. "The kind that keep you safe, no matter what happens to me." "Marcus!" Sarah's voice was steady, but he could hear the fear underneath. "What are you planning?" Before he could answer, Diesel's voice cut through from the window. "We got movement. 3 bikes coming up the access road. Marcus was at the window in 2 strides, peering through the gap in the curtains. Even at a distance, he recognized the lead rider, Viper, flanked by 2 prospects. Not coming for a fight then, but not coming in peace either. Get the kids into the back bedroom, Marcus told Sarah. Now. As she gathered the children, Marcus checked his Glock, feeling the familiar weight of it in his hand. Outside, the bikes had stopped just beyond the tree line, close enough to deliver a message, far enough away to avoid immediate confrontation. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Come alone. We talk. Last chance. Marcus looked at his reflection in the black screen of his phone. After tonight, Steele Rodriguez might not exist anymore. The question was whether Marcus could live with who he might become instead. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and betrayal. Marcus stood in the center of the concrete floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back, blood trickling from a split lip where Razor had landed a sucker punch. Around him, the familiar faces of his brothers formed a semicircle, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright hostility. 23 years, Viper said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. 23 goddamn years you've worn our colors, and this is how you repay us? Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the club president, refusing to look at the stack of photos on the makeshift table, surveillance shots of him with Sarah and the kids, leaving the grocery store, at the school pickup, pushing Emma on the swings at the park. Someone had been watching them for weeks. You got something to say for yourself, Steele? Viper continued, lighting a cigarette with deliberate slowness. Or are you just going to stand there bleeding on my floor? I did what was right, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Those kids would have died. Razor spat on the ground near Marcus's boots. What's right is loyalty to your brothers, not playing house with some dead cop's family. The mention of David's profession sent a ripple through the group. Marcus had hoped they wouldn't dig that deep, but the serpents were nothing if not thorough when it came to perceived betrayals. You know what this looks like? Viper moved closer, smoke curling between them. Looks like you've been feeding information to the feds through your little girlfriend. Looks like maybe that whole rescue story was bullshit from the start. Sarah doesn't know anything about club business. Marcus's voice hardened, and she sure as hell isn't working with anyone. Maybe not knowingly, Tank spoke up from the shadows. But you've been compromised, brother. That's clear enough. The warehouse door scraped open, and Marcus's heart sank as 2 prospects dragged in a struggling figure. Sarah. Her winter coat was torn, her face pale with terror, but her eyes blazed with defiance even as they shoved her to her knees beside him. Where are my children? She demanded, looking around the circle of leather-clad men. If you've hurt them... Kids are safe, Viper said, almost conversationally. For now. They're with a couple of our old ladies, probably watching cartoons and eating cereal. Real domestic scene. Marcus strained against his restraints, rage flooding his system. This is between me and the club. Leave them out of it. That's where you're wrong, Steele. Viper crouched down to Sarah's level. See, the way I figure it, there's only 2 ways this plays out. Either you've been feeding intel to the cops through your woman here, in which case you're both problems that need solving, or you've just lost your damn mind and forgotten where your loyalties lie. Sarah's eyes found Marcus's, and he saw the questions there, the dawning realization of what his world really was. I don't understand, she whispered. Marcus, what's happening? Tell her, Viper commanded, standing. Tell her what the serpents really do. Tell her about the runs, the territory wars, the things that pay for that nice little domestic fantasy you've been living. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, then met Sarah's gaze. I'm sorry. I should have told you everything. How touching. Razor pulled out a knife, testing the edge with his thumb. But we're past apologies now. Way I see it, we got ourselves a liability problem that needs permanent fixing. Wait. The voice came from the back of the group, and Marcus was surprised to see Diesel stepping forward. The younger member had always been quiet, more follower than leader. There might be another way. Viper's eyes narrowed. I'm listening. Steele saved those kids. Real hero shit, right? What if we use that? Diesel looked around the circle. We've been getting heat from the community, the city council talking about crackdowns. What if Marcus here becomes our community outreach? You want him to be our poster boy? Tank laughed harshly. That's the dumbest. Think about it, Diesel pressed on. Notorious biker saves family, turns his life around but stays loyal to his brothers. Good PR. Makes us look human instead of like animals. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. Marcus could see Viper calculating, weighing options. The club president had always been smart, always looking for angles. And if he refuses? Viper asked. Then we handle it the traditional way, Diesel said quietly. Sarah was looking between them, clearly lost but smart enough to understand the stakes. Marcus felt her trembling where their shoulders almost touched. Here's the deal, Steele, Viper finally said. You want to play family man? Fine. But you do it our way. Public appearances, charity rides, the whole 9 yards. You become the face of the kinder, gentler serpents. 1 foot wrong, 1 hint you're talking to cops, and your little family disappears. Permanently. Marcus stared at the man who'd been like a father to him, seeing clearly for the first time the monster beneath the Brotherhood rhetoric. Do we have an understanding? The safe house felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Marcus paced the small living room while Sarah bundled the children into the back bedroom, her movements quick and efficient, despite the terror he could see in her eyes. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, but it couldn't mask the distant rumble of motorcycle engines growing closer. How long do we have? Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she checked the locks on the windows. Not long enough. Marcus pulled back the curtain an inch, scanning the dark road that snaked through the forest. 3 sets of headlights cut through the night, moving fast. They found us quicker than I thought they would. His phone buzzed with a text from Razor. Last chance, brother. Walk away now and you live. Marcus showed Sarah the message. She read it twice, her face pale in the lamplight. Maybe you should go. Take your bike and... No. The word came out harder than he intended. I'm not leaving you, not leaving them. He gestured toward the bedroom where the children's muffled voices carried through the thin walls. This ends tonight, one way or another. Sarah moved closer, her hand finding his arm. Marcus, they're your family, your brotherhood. You're my family now. The words surprised him with their certainty. All of you. I should have realized it sooner. The rumble of engines grew louder, then stopped. Marcus killed the lights and moved to the window. 3 bikes sat in the clearing, their riders dismounting with deliberate slowness. Razor's massive frame was unmistakable even in the darkness. Beside him, Snake and Tommy flanked out, covering the exits. Back door, Marcus whispered, leads to a ravine. Too steep with the kids. Marcus checked his Glock, counting rounds. 18 left. Not nearly enough if this went sideways. There's something I need to tell you about why they want you dead so badly. Sarah's eyes widened. What do you mean? Your husband wasn't just in debt to them. He was skimming money from their drug operations, documenting everything. The club thinks he passed that information to you before he died. But I don't know anything about... Sarah stopped, her face going white. The insurance papers. What insurance papers? David left a safe deposit box. I haven't opened it yet because I don't have the money for the fees, but the bank said there were insurance documents and some kind of ledger. A boot kicked the front door, testing its strength. Razor's voice boomed through the wood. Steele! Time's up, brother. Send out the woman and we'll make this quick. Marcus grabbed Sarah's shoulders. Where's the key to that box? Hidden in Emma's teddy bear, but Marcus... That ledger could bring down half the club's operations. It's leverage. Another kick rattled the doorframe. Get the kids to the bathroom, lock the door, and don't come out no matter what you hear. Sarah shook her head. I won't leave you to face this alone. You have to protect them. They need you. Marcus cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Sarah. I need you to know that. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too. The front door exploded inward, the lock giving way with a splintering crash. Marcus shoved Sarah toward the bedroom as Razor filled the doorway, his cut gleaming with patches and honors earned through violence. "There's my wayward brother." Razor stepped inside, Snake and Tommy spreading out behind him. "Thought you could disappear with our loose end?" "She doesn't know anything, Razor. Let her go." "Can't do that, Steel. Too much at stake." Razor's hand rested on his gun. "But I'll make you a deal. Give us the woman, and I'll put in a word with the club. Maybe you can earn your way back." Marcus raised his Glock. "The answer's no." "Then you're choosing them over us? Over everything we built together?" "I'm choosing what's right." Razor's laugh was cold. "Right? Since when do we give a damn about right?" His expression hardened. "You've gone soft, brother. That family's made you weak." "No," Marcus said, his voice steady. "They've made me strong." The moment stretched between them. 20 years of brotherhood balanced on a knife's edge. In the bedroom, Marcus could hear Sarah whispering urgently to the children, getting them to safety. Razor drew his weapon. "Then you die with them." The first shot shattered the silence, but it wasn't Razor who fired. Snake's gun spoke first, aimed not at Marcus but at Razor's back. The big man stumbled forward, shock replacing rage on his face. "Sorry, boss," Snake said, his weapon now trained on Tommy. "But Steele's right. This has to end." Marcus stared at his old friend, hardly believing what he was seeing. "Snake, told you I had your back, brother. Always." The warehouse echoed with the rumble of approaching motorcycles as Marcus checked his watch. 3 minutes early, the Brotherhood was eager for blood. Sarah pressed closer to his side, her hand finding his as they stood in the center of the cavernous space. Behind them, Emma clutched baby Thomas while the twins flanked little Alex, their young faces pale but determined. "Whatever happens," Marcus murmured to Sarah, his thumb tracing over her knuckles, "I need you to know that these past months, they've been the best of my life." Before she could respond, the massive doors burst open. Chrome and leather flooded in as 30 Hell's Angels roared into the warehouse, their engines creating a deafening symphony that gradually died to an ominous purr. Marcus felt Sarah's hand tremble in his, but she didn't step back. The woman who had been broken by poverty and loss now stood like a warrior beside him. Viper dismounted first, his scarred face twisted with rage. Behind him came Razor, Tank, and faces Marcus had known for over a decade. Brothers who had bled with him, fought beside him, shared countless miles of highway. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger. "Well, well," Viper's voice carried across the concrete. "Steel Rodriguez, the man who forgot where his loyalties lie." Marcus stepped forward, putting himself between the club and his family. "This doesn't have to end in blood, Viper. I'm offering you the shipment location. Take it and let us walk." Viper's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You think this is about money? About some goddamn drugs?" He gestured to the assembled bikers. "You betrayed us for her, for them. That can't be forgiven with information. Then what do you want? Your life, their lives. A message that no one abandons the Brotherhood." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant drip of water from rusted pipes. Marcus felt the weight of his. 45 against his ribs, calculated distances and cover, counted exits. 30 against 1, impossible odds, but he'd been in impossible situations before. "Papa Marcus," Alex's small voice cut through the tension. The boy stepped out from behind his sisters, chin raised despite his fear. "Are these the bad men you told us about?" A few of the bikers shifted uncomfortably. Even hardened criminals had lines they preferred not to cross, and killing children was a line that made some men hesitate. "Yeah, buddy," Marcus said softly, never taking his eyes off Viper. "These are the bad men." Emma's voice joined her brother's, stronger than her 15 years should have allowed. "We're not afraid. You taught us to be brave." Something flickered in Tank's expression. Doubt, maybe regret. He'd been at Marcus's side for 8 years, had saved his life in Tucson and again in Phoenix. But brotherhood was brotherhood, and betrayal was betrayal. "Touching," Viper snarled, drawing his sidearm. "But this isn't a fairy tale. There's no happy ending here, Steele. Wait. The voice came from the warehouse entrance, and every head turned. Agent Carmen Reyes stepped into the light, her badge held high, followed by a dozen federal agents in tactical gear. Red laser dots began dancing across the assembled bikers. Marcus's heart sank. This wasn't rescue, this was catastrophe. Cornered animals fought the hardest, and Viper was already swinging his weapon towards Sarah. Time compressed into crystalline moments. Marcus lunged, his shoulder catching Viper in the chest as the gun discharged, the bullet singing harmlessly into the rafters. They crashed to the concrete in a tangle of limbs and fury. Around them, chaos erupted as federal agents and bikers engaged in a running firefight. "Get down!" Marcus shouted to his family, grappling with Viper for control of the weapon. Steel rang against steel as Viper's knife appeared, slashing toward Marcus's throat. He twisted, feeling the blade part the air inches from his carotid artery. Sarah had herded the children behind an overturned table, but even from the corner of his vision, Marcus could see the terror in their eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. They were supposed to disappear, find peace somewhere far from this violence. Viper's elbow connected with Marcus's ribs, driving the air from his lungs. The older biker was stronger than his wiry frame suggested, fueled by years of rage and betrayal. But Marcus had something Viper didn't, something worth dying for, worth killing for. With a roar that came from somewhere deeper than his chest, Marcus drove his knee into Viper's solar plexus, following with a crushing right hand that snapped the man's head back. The knife skittered across concrete as Viper crumpled. Around them, the firefight was ending. Several bikers lay motionless while others knelt with hands zip-tied behind their backs. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with motor oil and fear sweat. Agent Reyes approached cautiously, her weapon still drawn. "Marcus Rodriguez, you're under arrest." Marcus looked back at Sarah, at the children who had become his world, and felt his heart breaking. He'd saved them from one nightmare only to deliver them into another. The warehouse erupted in chaos as federal agents poured through every entrance, their tactical lights cutting through the smoky darkness. Marcus pressed himself against a concrete pillar, Sarah and the children huddled behind him as gunfire echoed off the metal walls. Tommy's men scattered like roaches, some returning fire while others dove for cover behind shipping containers. "This way," Marcus whispered urgently, guiding his makeshift family toward a maintenance corridor he'd noticed during his earlier reconnaissance. The children moved silently, trained by weeks of uncertainty to follow his lead without question. Emma clutched her baby brother while the twins flanked Sarah, their young faces pale but determined. Behind them, Tommy's voice rose above the din, screaming orders and obscenities as his empire crumbled around him. Marcus felt no satisfaction in his former brother's downfall, only the cold necessity of survival, the weight of Detective Morrison's wire pressed against his chest, its job complete. The evidence was transmitted, Tommy's confession recorded, and now all that mattered was getting his family to safety. They reached the maintenance corridor as footsteps thundered past the concealed entrance. Marcus counted heartbeats, listening for pursuit. Sarah's hand found his shoulder, her touch steadying him as it always did. In her eyes he saw not fear but absolute trust, a gift more precious than any treasure the club had ever offered him. "Marcus Rodriguez." The voice came from the corridor's far end, calm and professional. Agent Chen stepped into view, weapon lowered but ready. "It's over. Tommy's in custody." Relief flooded through him, but Marcus remained tense until he was certain. "The others?" "Most surrendered when they realized they were surrounded. Your information was accurate. We found everything exactly where you said it would be." Chen's expression softened slightly as she looked at Sarah and the children. "Medical teams standing by. We'll need statements, but that can wait." As they emerged from the warehouse, dawn was breaking over the industrial district. Police cars and federal vehicles filled the lot, their red and blue lights painting the scene in surreal colors. Marcus saw Tommy being loaded into an armored transport, his cut torn and bloodied, his eyes wild with rage. For a moment, Their gazes met across the chaos. Tommy's mouth moved, forming words that Marcus couldn't hear but understood perfectly. Threats, curses, promises of retribution. Marcus felt nothing. The man being hauled away was a stranger, wearing the face of someone he'd once called brother. That bond had died the moment Tommy put Sarah and her children in danger. "Daddy Marcus," little Jake tugged at his jacket. "Are the bad men gone?" Marcus knelt to the boy's level, his leather-clad frame incongruous next to such innocence. "Yeah, kid, they're gone for good." He looked up at Sarah, seeing his own emotions reflected in her tired smile. "We're safe now." The next hours blurred together. Medical checks, preliminary statements, arrangements for temporary housing while the investigation proceeded. Agent Chen assured them that Tommy's network was finished, the evidence comprehensive enough to put him away for life. The other clubs would likely fracture without his coordination, reducing them to manageable local problems. As afternoon faded to evening, Marcus found himself standing in the doorway of a modest safe house, watching Sarah help the children settle into their temporary home. The twins were arguing over bedroom arrangements while Emma tried to calm the baby. Normal family chaos, something he'd never experienced, but found oddly comforting. Second thoughts? Sarah appeared beside him, her voice gentle with understanding. "About leaving the life?" "No." He turned to face her fully. "About whether I know how to be what you need, every damn day." She reached up to touch the club tattoos on his neck, her fingers tracing designs that had once defined him completely. "You saved us, Marcus. Not just from freezing that night, but from everything that came after. You chose us over everything you'd ever known. Because you became everything I never knew I wanted." The words came easier now, this vulnerability he'd learned to embrace. "You and these kids, you're not just worth fighting for, you're worth changing for." Sarah's smile carried all the warmth that had first drawn him to her, but now it held something deeper, the promise of a future neither of them had dared imagine months ago. "So what happens now, Steele?" He considered the nickname that had once struck fear into hearts across the state. Soon it would be just a memory, replaced by something better. "Now we figure out how to be a family." Real simple, right? Her laugh was music in the gathering dusk. "Nothing about you is simple, Marcus Rodriguez." From inside the house came the sound of children calling for them, 5 young voices that had become the most important sound in his world. Marcus took Sarah's hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers as they turned toward their future together. The Hell's Angel was dead. The man who would be their father was just beginning.